So this is, last week, or actually it was 2 weeks ago, we did an overview of the AIPOS, the AI Product Operating System. And so what I want to do today is we're going to kind of go inside out, and I want to talk about Pillar 3. And the reason I want to do that is that right now in the industry, this is where everybody's focused, right? Claude Code came out and made a big splash. Codex has been out. GitHub Copilot, and so a lot of people are starting to use these the AI coding agents. And so what I want to do is get in front of it a little bit, because if you just kind of put them in the wild and we start to prompt them, we run into some issues. So what we want to talk about is how do we do this accelerated development without kind of losing control of our systems. All right. And so in the grand scheme of things, we're here in Pillar 3, accelerate development in the middle. Pillar 1 and 2, we're actually gonna talk about Pillar 1 next week. We're gonna go into define and design. It's gonna be pretty interesting. I think I don't know if Melissa's listening in, but we're gonna talk her into coming in and walking through her discovery agent in some of the pieces. But on the left-hand side, it's we want to think about like that as build to learn. And so that's where product is gonna spend a lot of its time using a lot of agents, different kind of techniques they can use. And then when we get to rapid validation, you'll hear me say prototype. Prototype is basically, can I put a couple of things together in a short period of time to go test something in the market. So for example, I don't know if you guys saw my LinkedIn post, but a couple of weeks ago, I put out 3 different front ends that I created in Lovable in about 8 minutes, right? Anybody can do this, product manager. And the goal of that was to determine if I was adding AI to my product, what was the easiest way for somebody to find it? So I put out 3 different screens. One had an AI tab to the right, one had an AI chatbot at the bottom, and the other one had in the left nav, you could click it and the AI chat would open. And so I sent these out and did some validation, and it came back, and my opinion was people were going to recognize the chatbot the most. And so it turns out that it did turn out that they liked the chatbot box at the bottom, right? So that's the kind of thing that we want our product team to be doing, right? So now when they go into describing the feature, they can tell development where they want these kind of widgets to sit in the product, right? So, and then we would take it into the accelerated development, right? The reason I want to show this is that when we go through, as we're challenging our organizations, right now, I don't think that AI is going to where the technology is today is we're going to have some human in the loop, right? So the idea is that where can I take all the things that take a lot of time and hand them off to the AI agent? So as we go through each of these pillars, I will talk about that. And this is our estimate here that of what percentage AI could do in each of these pillars, right? And as I go through each of the pillars through the next set of webinars, I'll explain why I think 70% or 80%. So today's case, we'll be talking about why I think we can get to 80% with development, right? So today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about any software, right? This doesn't have to be an AI product, doesn't have to be a GenAI product. It's any product you're delivering today that you're going to use the coding agents to help you deliver. Is how do you do that? How do you ensure that it's safe? You have good quality products, and it's coming out the back end, and it's what you expected, right? We'll talk about the speed trap. We'll go through some metrics from Pharos, my new favorite report. We'll talk about those and how they affect not only type of work we're doing, but how we measure our work, and then go through talking about the development readiness package. You also hear me say spec package or feature package. I mean the same thing when I say that. So if I switch the terms, that's what I'm talking about. And then go through talking about what we mean by the coding agents being small, testable, governed units of work, right? Just because the AI agent can handle large amounts of work, if we have people reviewing them, we have to be conscious of the fact that people aren't good. Like a developer isn't going to be able to do a very effective review of 20,000 lines of code, right? The AI may be able to generate that in a couple of hours, but if we still have, and I would argue you still need a senior developer in the loop to do those PR reviews, you're going to want to make sure that is a package that's manageable for them. And then what are some of the guardrails we can put in place? We'll actually go in and see specific guardrails. So what I'm going to do about partway through this presentation is we're actually going to go into a project where we have this running and in place so that you can actually see what the artifacts look like. Just so you know also that we're not, this isn't smoke and mirrors. This is work that's actually being done and used in a couple of different organizations. And then how do we validate a release candidate, right? We want to make sure that as we're going forward that when we come to a release decision, it's not a discussion. We don't have to worry. We should be able to go, yeah, it's ready to release. Should be a 2-minute, 5-minute discussion at most. We'll talk about the pillars, but across the pillars there are 8 kind of governance layers that get involved, some more so in technology side than others, and some more in the product, but all the way across the pillars, these evaluations and the guardrails are kind of checking and seeing where we are. While we have a Q&A session at the back end, if you want to ask questions while we go, if you hit us up in the chat, Eric or Jason will interrupt me and let me know. Okay. So again, we're going to talk about AI first delivery. The chart off to the right is just summarization of, again, where I think percentage of agent versus human will go. And I just want to be clear again that while we're all very excited about building GenAI apps or adding AI into a different new place in our products, any application you're building today, your legacy applications, you can install the governance kit, that the techniques that I'm going to show. You can install that to make sure that the coding agents are following your current architecture, right? In case if it's a legacy app, probably don't want to go through the effort yet of doing a full refactor, but but you do want to use the coding agents. If you leave the coding agents on their own, they're going to do just like ChatGPT might, right? Where you have say you have a Word document that you work in, you have a structure. ChatGPT may look at that, read up most of it. It's a really big doc, so it might drift or start adding paragraphs that you don't need. Keep in mind that these coding agents are LLMs, right? They've just been trained with a lot of coding data, but they're susceptible to the same type of problems that an LLM will have. So it'll have the same type of drift that you would have in a ChatGPT. And what are some of the techniques we would do? We would hand it templates that we wanted to follow, right? And so we're going to talk about how we do that. So in this area, our goal would be to get to 80% AI doing it, right? 80% of the work should be done by the coding agents. And what that's going to do is it's going to generate the code, generate tests, and then evaluate our execution, right? And when we do the test evaluation, what we've learned is, and one of the reasons we need something like a governance kit and a workflow is that the coding agents, depending on how you prompt it, your prompts are basically their goals, right? So if I prompt a coding agent and say, hey, I want you to write this code, make sure you add tests, and I want all the tests to pass before we consider it done. So your definition of done is all your tests pass. Well, what'll happen is as the agent goes, it'll write the tests and it'll start writing code, or it'll decide to write the code first and then write the test. And when it runs into a problem, it'll try a couple times to make the test pass. But remember, you told it its goal is to make the test pass. So if after a couple tries it can't make the test pass, it'll actually change the test to make it pass, right? And we all know from just test-driven development that that's the exact wrong behavior, right? We would never do that in our development environment, or maybe we would. And I'd suggest somebody find you and make you get another job. But anyway, I have to be careful if I point at my camera, it makes my face really big. So so basically, we want to make sure that in order for this to work, we have to define exactly what we mean. So we have to say, when we're doing test-driven development, we want you to write all your tests first and then make the test pass. Under no circumstance do you change a test. And then if it gets to the point where it can't make a test pass, it'll tell you. And then as the human in the loop, you have to figure out what to do. All right. And then evaluate the execution. And we're going to talk about how we do this inside the governance kit, is that we give it very specific evaluation criteria. And part of its job is to make sure that as it writes the code, it's passing this evaluation criteria. So each of the increments, it'll write the test, and then it'll validate that it's meeting the evaluation criteria. So as you build each increment, it's keeping up with the eval criteria, right? So on the human side, what are we responsible for? Well, the specifications, right? And review. Specifications are getting interesting because what's happening is that, back in the day when I was doing team level coaching, I always tried to get the product managers or the product owners to write what we call Gherkin. And I'll show the format of Gherkin, but Gherkin is basically a framework for behavior-driven development. And so what it describes behavioral tests, right? And so usually at the feature level, you want behaviors. And then what would happen is we would then break those behaviors down into user stories, and the team would negotiate the user stories, and that's what they would write code against, right? With the coding agents, user stories are too fuzzy. You could keep adding more information to them to make them more consumable by a coding agent. But what we've found so far is that if you write the specification in Gherkin and feed that, that's structured enough for the coding agent to then take it. The nice thing about that is that while the problem I used to have as a technical coach before was that it was difficult for the product owners to write this Gherkin because of the structure, so they never did it. And so what happening now is that with AI, that's not a problem, right? I can, if all I want to do is describe the feature and describe the NFRs in some sort of whatever description, right? Maybe it's not bulleted. I just kind of paragraph form, write a document and describe the feature that I want built. And maybe I have some user stories. I can feed that in, or you can feed that into either ChatGPT, or if you're using Jira, the Rovo agent is pretty good. AHA has their own kind of agents, and we built feature agents in both of those products that basically take the narrative form that the product owner that has written, or product manager, and created the Gherkin from that. Right. So then what happens is that specification package becomes the Gherkin and the NFRs, and the team now negotiates over that. Right. So what should happen now is the team should look at the Gherkin, have a conversation around, do we cover edge cases? Are there other examples? Should we add a table with examples in this section and things like that? And you negotiate around the spec just like you would do today. Right. And then, our job is that one of the things I have to always make clear with developers is, even though you're using a coding agent, you still own the code, right? That code is still yours. I don't care if you got through and didn't touch a line of code. Claude Code wrote it all. It's still yours as it goes into production, right? Because Claude Code is not going to get a phone call in the middle of the night, right, if it breaks, right? So you're not giving up accountability. And so what happens is that 20% that's left, you can really use some brain power on it, right? And nice thing about this is that if you have an architectural bent anyway, what's nice is as the agent's doing that, you basically have freed up cycles to think about the next thing. Or should I go back in and help the agent refactor around a certain design pattern that maybe it missed, right? So there are things that you can be thinking about from an efficiency standpoint that the agent may have made its own decision on, and you can go back in and refactor that. So, I don't want to over-index on these numbers, but what we're seeing is that it's no doubt that things are faster. Anybody that's touched Claude Code or Codex, they ask it to do something and it builds something in sometimes minutes, sometimes hours. I think for me, it's easy to see from a UI standpoint. I've always been like a back-end API developer. So writing a UI is not really my forte. But if you pick products like Lovable or Claude Design now, and you describe the UI you want, the thing that comes out of the back end is, to me, is miraculous, right? It's beautiful and it takes like a half hour. And I recall creating UIs in React for a product, spending, I kid you not, a week trying to get a box to expand throughout the whole image, right? So it looked right, just crazy. But things are going faster, right? So task completion up 34%, right? That's great numbers. Bugs per developer going up 54%. Probably not what we want, right? Incidents per PR. So a PR is every time, if I think I'm done with code and I check it in, what I do is I create a PR or a pull request. And what that's saying is that, hey, I built this. It's not into the main line of code, but I now want to move that into the main line of code. So somebody review it, approve it, and it'll get merged into, and we can merge it into the main branch. That main branch is what gets deployed into production, right? So a pull request is my way to ask for my changes to get put into production. So we're seeing 243% increase in incidents per PR. So that means that I think I'm done. I put in a PR request, and now a senior developer is finding way more problems with it, right? That's a problem. So now what we've done is we've shifted our bottleneck to our most expensive resources, right? So we can't have that. Code churn. Code churn is when we're just rewriting code over and over again, right? And this is not only us, but the coding agent. Right? And it would make sense if you see PRs are up, it means we have to go back into the code and fix something. And then the one in the middle, this one actually disturbs me probably the most. 31% of the PRs are being merged without review. What this is an indication of is that the reviewers just have too much to do, right? So their WIP is just way too high. And so what are they doing? They have too much work. So they're like, well, I don't know, this looks good. I just got to get it moving because we got to get the release out, right? So now I have things, even though I know we have more incidents per PR, I'm going to start pushing PRs without reviewing them. And then the review time is going up, right? So these are all the things that what we want to be able to do is clean that up. And the way to clean it up is not on the back end, right? We talked about this a couple of weeks ago. The way to clean this up is from the beginning. And if you think about it, this flow is no different than what we've always said is the right way to do things, is pick the right product, right? So we pick the right thing to build, and product asks us to build it. We define what we want to do. And when we're talking about specifications, right, we're not talking about 4 months. We're talking about a couple of hours spending upfront on the specifications. We can use AI to help us narrow those down. Once we get a clean set of specs, if we then follow our architecture, which I'd argue all developers are supposed to do, right? Problem is that architecture is typically defined in either maybe in GitHub Docs, or it's out in SharePoint or in Confluence, and you're supposed to know to follow these architectural and testing standards, right? So what we want to be able to do is how do we move that? And same thing we've always said is how do we shift that left? The more left we can shift that and get that right up front, the more we can let the automation and the speed take over at the back end. So the idea is that the speed isn't the problem, right? It's the unmanaged speed. It's the kind of the willy-nilliness of work that's going through. Willy-nilliness. Somebody get a shirt. So again, the fix is upstream, right? We want to author where the cost is created. We want to make sure that if our specs are bad, that's what's causing us to have defects in the back end. If we're relying on the perfect prompt to describe what we want and the iteration of prompts to describe what we want, we're going to have a problem at the back end. Teams are trying to catch these problems in review. It's too late. Once you get into that review, we've seen that too many things are coming into review, so they're going to get lost, right? And then, of course, we definitely don't want to be dealing with these things in production, right? We'll see it with increased incidents and learning. And one of the things is, I can't remember if I have a slide on this, but one of the things we have to do is we have to rethink the way we look at metrics. Right now, we have the team health metrics, and then you have your business metrics. But thinking about the health metrics, what we typically look at is velocity, right? Have we increased velocity? Have we shortened lead time, right? And we know that's true, right? We know it to be true. We can do things really fast. Problem is that 3-4 months down the road, we're seeing bad things in production. So how do we? The whole goal is how do we resolve that? And so when we're looking at our metrics, what we have to start doing is we have to pair every velocity metric with a quality metric, right? Because velocity going up doesn't mean anything if quality goes up, right? We used to do this manually back in the day when we had a Scrum team, and people would go, hey, they're pretty good at hitting their velocity. Let's say their velocity is 50, right? 50 story points a sprint, and they're killing it. Always inside their 50, and they're great at their estimates. And so what you always get from the product manager is that, hey, if we can do 50, could we try 55 this sprint? It's like, sure. And so what would you do? You'd bump it to 55. And if your quality stayed good, if you didn't have any escape defects during that sprint, you'd probably use 55 as your new velocity, and you'd run that forward, right? And so let's say you go a couple sprints at 55, and you're like, hey, we're killing it, man. So let's bump it to 60. So you get to 60 and you get your first leaked bug out of your sprint. Maybe you think it's an anomaly, right? So then you go the next sprint, you do 60 again, and you start to see now you got 2-3 leaks, and you're starting to see some churn. Well, the problem is obviously your velocity is too high, right? You need to shrink that velocity back down to 55 so that you can do what I forget what the number is. So it's the same thing here, except bigger, right? So we want to make sure that we're tying those quality metrics together with our delivery, with our velocity metrics. But again, with the AIPOS, you want to move everything to the point of authoring. And the problem is it feels, we had this discussion internally recently, is that it feels like taking your time to do planning, it's slowing you down. And every time we don't do it, we see a problem in the back end, right? So it's take that time to do planning. And again, it shouldn't be like the elapsed times that we used to see back in the day, right? It doesn't take some couple minutes to write a feature nowadays with these tools. The tools also have context of everything else, right? So it's even easier to write a good scope feature. And then to create the handoff, it takes 2 minutes inside of the coding, inside of the agent, right? Create your gherkin. And then you spend your half hour, 2 hours going through and fine tuning that, right? Same type of thing. May have a 3 amigos where you have a QA person, a tech lead, and the product manager or product owner going through that and fine tuning the gherkin. But once you get that correct, you can feed that into the system and it's going to move. So when we talk about the development readiness package, like I said, sometimes I'll call this the feature package. We're looking at these things, right? We want to have gherkin acceptance criteria, and I'm going to actually show you what these look like inside of a project in a minute. You have your gherkin acceptance criteria. You have your evaluation criteria. So this is not deterministic and probabilistic, right? So whether you're doing a regular application where you're looking at things like first virtues or other quality standards as you're going through, and number of all your tests passing, things like that, pass, fail. It also includes an evaluation stack of an LLM. So for example, if I have an LLM and it's important that it's grounded, I'd have groundedness eval criteria in there. So it's got to be 95% grounded in my reference material. It's got to be 80% accurate, right? So we would have that acceptance, that criteria also included in the eval criteria when we describe it, right? And so this is kind of new for product managers, right? As they build their first GenAI app, they may not know that they have to build this type of evaluation criteria. And again, there are things we can do, like, so the agents that we built inside of AHA or Robo actually try to determine, based on the description of what you're building, if it thinks it's a GenAI app. If it is, it'll query the product owner for evaluation criteria. It doesn't need to be perfect first time, but you want to get it in there so that as you build the app, that you're doing some evaluation driven development if it is a GenAI app. The architecture assumptions, right? This is going to be described in our architecture docs, and then an implementation sequence. So what happens with the coding agents is that we found, just like you find in ChatGPT, that if you make it plan first, right? And what you want to do, and this is where the developer needs to get involved, right? It creates a plan, and you want to validate that plan against what you would expect it to write, right? So that plan is going to bring in the features. It's going to bring in the NFRs. It's going to bring in the evaluation criteria. And then it's going to also look at your architectural documents, and it's going to blend them together, just like you would as a developer, right? You're going, oh, I got to write this. It's an API. It belongs in this folder. And it's going to write out that pre-flight plan. And so as a developer, you review that plan. If you like it, great. If you don't, you chat with it till it becomes the plan that you want. And then at that point, it goes and you ask it to create an incremental plan for you. And then what it'll do is it'll come back it'll take another run with a different LLM, take a look at the plan, and then break the increments down into small, like check-inable kind of things. So what that does is it moves you away from having to prompt everything in at the beginning of the project, right? Like, hey, I'm trying to build a RAG application that's going to pull data from these 3 files, and I want it to answer questions like this. It has to have a grounded score of 95%, and it's got PII information in it, and it's got this, and I want it to be a hexagonal architecture. Like, before, you had to add all that into the prompt, right, and hope you didn't miss anything, right? And then just hope that it goes right. In this structure, and again, I'll show you in the repo, is this also gets checked in. So now you have lineage of, here are the things that I told it to do. Here's the plan that it had. And then here's the plan that it ran against to create the code, right? And so now, if there is ever a problem, you can trace back exactly what went wrong, and you can either fine tune your documents or whatever, right? So you're building this continuous learning system, right? So in this package, one of the things that you want to do when you start is, in an epic, you want to have a very clear problem statement, and that problem statement should define the user's problem, and then how you're going to measure success, right? And once you do that, it takes everything else. So now it's got context. It starts to create an understanding of the input and outputs, understand the guardrails that you want, right? So you're going to build this while it's going to query you, and you kind of define this in the epic. And then what happens is the feature will then extract that information and flesh out the detail to the point where you can build a feature package. And so there are basically 4 things that are wired in, and these are examples, right? It doesn't have to be a hexagonal architecture. For UI, you typically have like an MVVM boundary, but it can be whatever architecture you use. If you use a layered architecture, you can define that, right? But what it does is it treats the architecture as contracts. And then it has guardrails for access and safety. So, what are their permissions? What should they do if there's an escalation? If you're doing an LLM or something like that, what in the governance kit do we need, right? We should have prompt injection testing. And so what we do is if you install the evaluation piece of it, we install kind of an opinionated view of what that should be, but you can put in whatever products you want. So for example, we'll use prompt foo for prompt injection, right? And so the evaluation harness, right? We use dbeval. It's still using Ragus, but for very specific determination of thing. And then we kind of flip between Nemo guardrails and also guardrails AI. And then it's wired in from the build, right? So from the time that you're writing the code, going through a build, these things are constantly running and evaluating, right? So by the time you get to the point where a developer wants to check something in, everything should be done and validated. And then as you get down, you basically have two release gates, right? And so what happens is if these release gates both pass, then it's easy to say, yeah, deploy it, right? And so the first one is really kind of the structural side, right? Test-driven development. Are the schemas right? Do you have a good, clean pipeline? You know, what are the controls in place in your pipeline? Do you have Veracode in your pipeline? And have you remediated the whatever severity incidents that security incidents that your team requires before moving into production? Test set and the eval corpus. And that foundation was built from the beginning, right? That's what the spec was built off of. So when the coding agent is going through, it's constantly validating itself against the schemas, the pipeline, and the other controls that you put in place. So the likelihood of you being wrong when it comes out the other end is severely decreased, right? And then from a behavioral standpoint, we have the behaviors defined in Gherkin. I mean, typically it used to be called behavior-driven development. But basically what it does is you have your scenarios. There are priorities on the scenarios. You can tag them for edge cases and boundary conditions, which gives you a lot of flexibility in the testing. If you want to test at different parts of the stage, if your tests start getting too big or whatever. But in the behavioral side, you want to make sure that you reach your evaluation thresholds. So if your structural integrity is good, all your tests are passing and everything's good, and your behavior is good, then you're probably ready to deploy, right? And it's no longer a guess. It's just a gate. It's just a decision. Eventually, you could get to a point where you could do auto deploys on it if you wanted to. All right, I'm not going to talk through a RAG application. I actually want to do this. Can you guys, can you see this code? Did my screen change?
Yeah, we can see it.
Awesome. All right. So just so you know, here at Accelerated Innovation, we drink our own champagne. I'm actually half a Magnum in at this point, but it's not the point. But so what I want to do is I want to show you, and I'm going to give, I don't know if Melissa's on, but I'm going to give her some props because basically this is the beginning of Melissa's, she was creating a discovery engine and she was using the governance kit, right? So I'm going to walk, and you can see this is active, right? I could respond yes, and it would keep going. But what I want to do is show you the pieces and parts of the governance kit inside of here and how they interact, right? So when you install the governance kit, you can, it works across all the major coding agents, right? The coding agents, they use something called the Open Skills Standard. So these skills that it creates, these skills that I created, right? Architecture pre-flight, implementation plan, they're almost exactly alike across all the agents, right? Where they differ slightly is Codex uses a different way to deploy them. It uses an agent folder inside of your files. But in general, they follow the same. So these skills will work across whatever coding agent you decide to implement, right? And so I'll go through this in a minute, but for the skills, basically it's going to go through and it's going to do an architecture pre-flight first. And what that pre-flight does is it takes a combination of the features and the architectural documents, and I'll show those in a second. It takes that combination and it creates a pre-flight document. And then from that, it'll then, if you approve the pre-flight, it'll then go into spec planning. And spec planning is when it's saying, okay, you agreed to everything. So now I'm going to go figure out what are the slices I should break this down into to make it incremental changes that are, and what I did was I told it to make them check-inable, right? I use different words, but I can't remember what exactly I told it. But small enough for somebody to review, but big enough so it's not a pain in the butt. They keep checking in. You should be checking in on a regular basis. But the PRs, like having a 2-line PR, probably, unless it's just logically makes sense, probably want it to be a little bit beefier than that, right? And so now what happens is that when my senior developer gets a review, he can see it and adjust to it, right? And he can actually do something about it, right? And so what happens is that we'll drop in a marker that tells you the level 4 is spec-driven development. And so I need feature files, and I have my architecture docs. The agent is, in this case, I installed it for Claude Code. It could be Codex, it could be Copilot, right? So you decide what it is. And then my CI/CD pipeline is in GitHub, and I'm using a Python fast API. So what ends up happening is let's take a look at the architecture documents real quick. So in the docs folder, they describe the architecture, right? So in this case, let's just open up the tech stack. So if we go into the technology stack, I'm telling it my primary language for this one is Python. I'm going to use some standard Python stuff. I'm telling it to use the architectural contract. Here's how I describe my model. If I don't want it to be hexagonal architecture, I could tell it to use a layered architecture, and I'd probably change the folder structure I want to use, right? So what I'm doing is I'm just describing, and you can see this is like a prompt to an LLM, right? And so it can see these things. The nice thing about this is it doesn't suck up your tokens. The way the skills are built is they're built to progressively load. These are progressive load technique. And so what happens when these coding agents start up is they'll load up all the skills, and what it does is it loads up the skill description and the argument hint. And then what it does is while it's running, it goes, hey, I need to generate a feature plan and create a plan.md file. Oh, okay. I got a skill for that. Okay, let me go load up that skill and see what I need. So it'll load the skill up and it come through, and it's like, hey, well, part of this skill, I need to read features. The argument's going to come in as the file name. I need to read up the features thing. I need to read up the architecture doc. I need to read up the eval criteria. So none of that was loaded into and tokens used up right away, right? So now it goes to get that, and then before it does anything, it makes sure it can load that up. And if you watch the agent, you'll see it loading up and reading those as part of the skill, right? And so, like I said, in these tech stacks, you describe basically what you want it to do, right? And your testing, you define your testing philosophy. If you don't like this testing philosophy, you change it, right? And this is by repo. If you notice, I'm in a repo. I'm in a repository, basically a project, and I have my I have architecture documents for this specific repository. There are ways after you install the governance kit that you can do a calibration. So if I put this into a repository, let's say I'm using a hexagonal architecture, but I'm not using common. Maybe I'd say common -app. I don't know why I do that, but I use a different folder name. Well, there's and that's just one small change, but maybe there are multiple things like that. Part of the governance kit gives you a calibration step. So basically you can calibrate it against the current repository, and it'll align with, hey, this is what you said in all of your architecture documents, in your design principles, things like that. It doesn't exactly map to your repo. How do you want me to help you fix that? And you can do one of two things. You can say, use the architecture I described, or you can modify the architecture as described to match your repo, right? So that way, you're not forcing some sort of major rewrite to your application unless you intend to do that. And there are different stacks, right? So when you install this, you can install for .NET, you can install for Java, Go, JavaScript, whatever. And if there isn't a stack available, it's really just 4 or 5 files in here that you need to modify. But so that's the back end. And then the features are like, so let's see, we're working on this one, right? So here's the acceptance feature, right? So here's the gherkin. This is what isn't gherkin pretty? There you go. So what you do is you describe the feature, right? And then I'm not going to go through this in detail. And it's basically given when then scenarios, right? So here's the scenario. PM confirms an inferred persona. when the PM confirms R&D manager, and basically what it's going to do is give examples, right? And so what you want to do is give it enough examples so that when you're creating the code, that it's creating generic, right? You're not hard coding the fact that it's R&D manager in the app, right? But again, this is how Gherkin worked from the beginning of time. Gherkin's been around for 10 or 15 years, I think. And I've used it before without using coding agents. But you can see that it's pretty clear as to what it wants you to do, right? Now, I don't know, I don't think I went back through and told to create edge cases, but here's what the Gherkin looks like. And then I would define the NFRs. In this case, I'm telling it that there's some information in this feature that I want to make sure I stay aligned with. Here's my repository scope. I want it to stay inside the discovery engine. This is the other issue that people run into that it's hard that people don't think about is that if I have a multi-repo application, if I go in and I tell the agentic coder to do something, even if it's outside my repo, it might try to build it, right? Because it doesn't know, right? You didn't feed it all of it. So what you want to be able, what you want to do if you have a multi-repository situation is describe what this repository does, and then you might want to describe what the others do, and it'll stay within its scope, right? And then we have the eval criteria. In this case, it's just deterministic, and so what it's going to do is it's going to enforce my first evaluation, which is it goes through, make sure that we're following good coding standards, that we're following solid principles, that code's separated, and then some other specific things, and it creates a score for each one of those. And part of the score is do all my evaluations, my test path, and then same thing with the virtues of code quality, right? And so we give it a target score of 4, and it gets built in, right? So what happened is I came in with acceptance feature. Like if I look at this next one, so let's say I close down. So one that hasn't been worked on yet has acceptance feature, eval criteria, and NFRs. Now, what I did was I started coding this one. So it went through and it created an architecture pre-flight, right? So let's do a preview. So the architecture pre-flight is basically summarizing what it knows about my architecture, right? It's going to use layering from the architecture. What are the API conventions? So it's just going to give me a summary, make sure I know where I'm at. Go through a boundary analysis. It'll determine if I'm doing something that's against the current architecture, and if it is, then it'll suggest that I create an ADR, an architectural decision record. It'll automatically generate that you can take to your architecture team for review. Tell you the tests that it wants to that are required, any risks or unknowns, and then any kind of pre-flight conditions that you should be concerned about. So as a developer, I'm going to read through this, and let's say I'm like, yeah, that's all cool. I accept it. It'll then go and it'll build the plan, right? So then the plan, if I open up in preview, make it easier to read, it'll say, okay, so here's my plan, right? And so if I'm going to retire in my WF0 feature, I created something that was a stub just to get me through testing. And so it wants to make sure that I'm going to be filling it out in this increment. So I want to make sure that after I fill it out that I retire the old one, right? So we don't have dead code, right? And, a lot of times this kind of stuff that can get missed, right? So it goes through, creates scope boundaries, what's in scope, what should be out of scope. If I was in a multi-repo environment, it would show me the things that it didn't consider inside this repository. So again, as the engineer, developer, I should be looking at that and either agreeing with it or correcting it, right? And then comes through, what are the relevant contracts I need to stay within? What ADRs should I focus on? And then the interfaces. Then it's going to finally get to the point where it's going through my evaluation. It thinks that I should be able to score a 5 on these 3 items. It thinks I should score at least a 4 here, 4.8. And so it's going to go through and do a redistribution. And then based on what the average comes up with, it's going to tell you, yeah, I'm pretty sure we can meet these testing thresholds, right? Because you set a threshold of 4. And then it's going to come in and define your increments. And so once planning is done and you say, okay, begin increment 1, it will actually go and implement this increment, right? And then the way we typically set things up is we tell it to run an increment and then wait. So if we're checking code in, you'll see that I was running here. Over here's this icon. This is my source control system. So if I click on that, I can go in and I can see things that are being changed, right? So once it gets done, it says, hey, I'm done increment 1. I'm ready to check in. You can actually, it gives you, it's very easy to go in and look at these and then find the diffs, what's different in this code from the other code, right? So you can see that it's pretty manageable for me as a developer to go look at this. If you're not used to looking at diffs, it looks a little more complicated than it is. But the nice thing about the plan is that it's telling me what I'm getting ready to do. And then when I review it as a developer, I'm like, okay, did it do this? Yeah, it did that. Okay, good. Let's check it in. Let's move to the next thing. And then you just kind of go through the increments as you go. All right. So again, what the governance kit does is it make sure you do planning, create your acceptance criteria, understand what your non-functional requirements are, understand what passing means to you, what's your definition of done, and then it'll go through and it'll pull in your features. You saw it pull in the architectural documents that it needed, right? In this case, it felt like it needed to create an ADR, right? So it created that. And that's something you have to review and then accept or it won't move forward, right? And then built a plan or built a pre-flight. This is where during the pre-flight and during the plan is where the developer does his best work, right? This is where you should be thinking about, how would I implement this? Does this line up? Does this follow the feature that I want to develop? At this point, once you go, you could almost let this run autonomously. I don't do a lot of code changes once I've been through this process, right? And I'm going to start testing the, Claude came out with a /goal. And what it'll do is it'll run till it meets an event, right? So I could see where I could start this and say /goal plan, build my plan. And so it would run all the way through and stop here. Now, the only problem with that is that I missed any input I could have in architecture pre-flight, but I could fix that at plan, right? So again, take it in, reads in the feature, reads in your architectural documents, and ties those together. So now my prompt, when I get started, it'll be easy to find in here. It's pretty long. But my prompt when I get started is not a long prompt. My prompt is go into plan mode and plan feature WF2-persona-confirmation. That's it. That's all I have to prompt. And then everything else is tracked. And since it's in here and I haven't ignored it, all of this gets checked into my repository. So if I ever have a problem with anything down the road, I can come back in here and I can take a look at how did I build that? What was the plan? Did I miss something in here or is it something else, right? So you have a tie-in to all that. All right. Any questions? No. All right. I know it's kind of technical, but what I wanted to show you guys is that this thing is real. We're using it at some clients. We use it internally, as I just showed, and so it's a framework that's working and getting pretty good results. Along the AIPOS is that underlying everything is that everything needs to stay. Part of what we do in the discovery is we want to define the solution architecture, right? Or before we begin the development. So we want to make sure that we're staying aligned and validating against that outcome. You can see the architectural contracts against how we're doing things, engineering, maintaining the code, data source context. But basically, these will run, and they'll run differently. I'm going to go through this in more detail in one of the future webinars. because what I want to show you is the AIPOS across the ecosystem. And then some of these are more important during engineer and less important, but they're all happening. And then some are more important while you're working on a product and less important while and then so they'll get measured and you'll see them, right? But everything's being measured across the full life cycle. And the reason you have to do that is the AIPOS is built in pillars. And so it isn't necessarily a sequential loop. As you implement this stuff, the output from one of the pillars can be taken in as input to another, right? So as you get to the end, maybe you have an NFR that you described, response time had to be under 5 seconds for an LLM response. And and you're killing it, right? It's 2-3 seconds, you're doing great. And then in production, you're monitoring it and you're starting to see it creep up to 3.5, maybe it's getting to 4 seconds. And so what you want is a message being sent over to your discovery engine and pillar one, and your discovery engine seeing that and understanding that, hey, I'm creeping up towards my 5-second response time. Should I move this in or should I check? Like maybe we added a bunch of cool stuff and clients are now okay with like a 7-second response time. So now I have to do something, right? So I can either go ask a couple questions. I could prototype something that showed what the difference between a 7% delay or response time versus a 5% look like and see if anybody notices the difference, right? And so that would determine as to whether or not I needed to do anything about bringing the response time down. Maybe I don't need to do anything, but I'd rather know ahead of time than having a bunch of customers call me saying, hey, man, taking 10 seconds to get a response, told you can't do it you have to do it under 5, and now you have 15 mad customers and you're trying to fix this on the fly like it's an emergency defect, right? So want to make sure we're getting that information on a continuous feed. So, the point of this in this pillar, the target 80%, I think you can see that if based on the governance kit, if we follow this process, and again, it may seem onerous, but it's not, right? You're defining features, you're creating the feature that you're going to create user stories off of. It's easy at that point to create Gherkin, which is easy for the coding agent to take in. It's easy to define your architecture. You probably already have it documented in some sort of a Confluence page or something else. Just a matter of copying that into where the governance kit docs are, right? And so if you do that, you're all set up, single prompt, you get going, right? And you move everything back, and all your review time should be spent on making sure that feature package is ready, right? Then you have readiness package, and then as you go, the R0 and R1 gates are built in, and so by the time you get done with it, you should be able to investigate those and go, yeah, I'm cool, I can move this to production. So next week, we're going to go into define and design. That's going to be pillar one. And I'll talk a little bit about the discovery agent type of things you can do there. But really, what do we mean by define and design and registration links? Blank. We'll get the registration link out quickly. In the future, I'll put a barcode up here. I forgot to do that. But, reach out. The governance kit is on GitHub, right? Or you can do a pip install govkit, or you can go to the repository to find it, right? The README's in there. It's pretty self-explanatory, but if you decide to install it, you want to give me a call, I can walk you through it. So that's it. I talked kind of fast, got done in under an hour. Were there any questions, or was I talking to myself? Am I on mute?
You are not on mute. That was awesome.
All right, good. Thank you.
Any questions from the audience before we wrap up? We got a couple of minutes, or we can give folks a couple of minutes back. Going. If you have any questions, or let's see on. Yeah, so I had one question. Where exactly can someone find this? I think on GitHub. the answer.
If,
Other than that,
so the easiest way to find it right now is if you go to PyPy. It's in production as a open source. So if you do a pip install govkit, it'll install it. But if you go to PyPy, you can see it. Also, in accelerated innovation / AI governed delivery or governed AI delivery is the repo.